A part of this story becomes how God dictates the layout of the tribes. It's a fascinating study to look at if you have time to really dive in and to understand what banner they're underneath, how they're camped out, how the interactions of it is going. But there's one that jumped out to me, and it's the tribe of Dan. See, Dan is the fifth son of Jacob. It's actually the first son to Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, as she is barren and trying to have kids, and prays, and she now has a son, and Rachel says, God has finally vindicated me. He's listened to my cry and given me a son. I'm going to call his name Dan. And Dan means to judge. I think she's dealing with this concept of not feeling adequate, but Dan is a judge. And Genesis 49 says that Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes. He'll be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the way that bites the horse's heel so that its rider tumbles backwards. But Daniel's this guy, this tribe, that's quick to defend, like a serpent along the trail. See something happen, pow, it's a judge. It's immediate, it has to be there. That's what Dan's purpose is, this constant lying in wait like a coiled snake to snap out at justice and say, no, this is wrong, this is how it should be. So once they arrive at Sinai, God begins to put these tribes into order. Basically, they're going on an extended desert camping trip, and they need order. How do you get these people to survive in a very hot, barren wasteland without killing each other? Got to go to the bathroom? Don't do it in the camp. Do it out there. Don't pitch your tent that close to mine. You snore. Get away. So he tells them, he says, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, camp towards the sunrise. You all are the leaders. That's God's country. God comes from that direction. He's talking to you. Get out front. You're camping to the east. It says that then they were supposed to march as the first wave of the children of Israel. Second, Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. Your job, right behind the leaders. There's always a group of people that supports the leaders. Make sure they're going where they need to go. Then right behind them is the tabernacle. The Levites carry the tabernacle. It's the heart of the tribes at the middle. Make sure that tabernacle is protected. It's always got to be at the core. Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, they camp to the west. You're following the tabernacle. And now it's the back. Asher, Naphtali, Dan. I want you to camp to the north. You're going to march in the back, but I want you to camp out north. North of everybody when we actually set up camp. Remember that. So when we get to Dan, there's an interesting verse that happens. And it says that the banner of the camp of Dan set out, the collector for all the other camps according to its legions. Dan's job is to bring up the rear and collect. They are to protect the poor, the needy. Those of you that went on a long hike with a group of people, things happen. Injuries happen. You begin to immediately know how many people are fit and how many are not. And before long, there's people that fall to the back. Dan's job is to collect them. Now, I can see them going through the desert, and they're picking up things. There's socks, there's hats blown off, there's Grandpa Steve keeps wandering away, and Dan's gathering it all up. And what do you think they have to do after the day's walk is over? How would you feel if your job was to collect all day long, and it's now to set up camp, and you come stumbling into camp with all the odds and ends of everything, and now you got to camp at the north part of camp. You got to walk through everybody who's already set up, and you got to go through camp handing out socks and hats and Grandpa Steve. Things begin to happen in the desert. We know the story. It says that half of the children of Israel, those that are over 40, die. It seems like most of the older generation now is gone except for Moses. What happens when you have this massive people and that amount of death happening? Where do you think that's going to occur? Do you think that Dan may have had to pick up a lot of issues and remains and make sure things are being dealt with? You see this Manasseh had a death again, and they're still crying over their lost one, trying to make sure that it's now at least covered with stones or something so the hyenas and lions doesn't get it. So they're waiting around, making sure everybody's taken care of through this desert. Something happens here in this desert because Dan is trying to walk this godly life, constantly making sure everybody's okay, making sure everybody in the community isn't overworked, make sure the cart broke again, and now we have to help them put it back together to help everybody get back on the road. Every day, every time you're traveling, everything that is happening, this tribe at Dan has to make sure everybody is making it. It's an exhausting one. It's one that's difficult for leadership to see. Judah's marching ahead under the banner of the Lion. They're leading the way. They're trying to hear from God. They've got their own problems. And something begins to happen at the back of the tribes. They get to the blessings. Now Moses is at Mount Nebo, ready to die because God is not allowing him into the promised land. He begins to bless all the tribes, and he gets to the tribe of Dan, and it's the shortest blessing of all the blessings of the children. But he says, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan, is what it says in English. I came across the Hebrew translation that says, Dan is like a lion cub, a small lion, jumping at every noise. After 40 years of being in the back, being attacked from different sides, constantly on the alert, Dan now is at the promised land in trauma, or at least war scared. You know, you've heard these Vietnam vets that just the slightest noise and they're triggered, or they can't sleep, or a light flashes and they're immediately back into the battlefield. And Dan, for some reason, is struggling. They now are at the promised land. The reward is there. Imagine 40 years of picking up after this community, making sure everybody's there, and now they are divvying out the promised land. It's your turn. Everything is what you've been wanting now. It's your chance to hear what God is going to do and what these leaders are going to give you. You can hear Joshua begin and say, okay, Gad and Reuben, you get the fertile plains of Moab and the Ammonites with grazing and the wheat fields of the plains. Asher, Naphtali, you get the mountains of Galilee. Beautiful. Zebulun, Issachar, Manasseh, you get the flooded plains of southern Galilee. Ephraim, Gad, Benjamin, you get the mountains of Judea. Judah, Simeon, you get the grazing of the plains and the southern areas and the mountains. Now it's your turn. Second largest tribe, Dan, I need you to guard the back door. I want to give you the land where the Philistines are. I'm going to give you the smallest portion of land. Dan tries. In archaeology, we see at least one area of worship that they found the symbol of Yahweh. And they set up camp between Eshtaol and Zorah on the ridge line. Tent camps. All we see in archaeology is tent camps. They never were able to settle. And Dan tries to do what it's been doing for years. Protect the weak. The story then that we hear about, one of the last of the tribes, is a guy by the name of Samson. I'll do a side note here. Those that are constantly dealing with the weak and needy, why does it seem that leadership always seems to put them in the front lines? Have you noticed that? Those that are doing the hardest work and maintaining and making sure everything's going, it seems like we just put them out there. And now this tribe of Dan is small, and Samson's the one left, and we understand this story, a little bit of the story of Samson. He begins to toy with the Philistines. He's trying to do what God has given him. God has given him strength and told him to be this judge, to be this person for the tribes. And he sees this Philistine woman at Timnah and decides that he wants this woman to be his wife. And his parents are objecting, obviously, because it's not of the tribes. But he insists, and now they're getting to have this wedding. And there's a week-long wedding, and it ends up with his wife testing him, and he now has to answer the questions about his hair, and kills 30 Philistines and runs away. And then his anger subdues a little bit, wants to go back and consummate the marriage. And we find out that the wife has now been given to the best man, and he just goes crazy. And then they kill the bride, and he is now furious. And now the Philistines raise up an army of 1,000. Where do you go when they're chasing you and you're the tribe of Dan? Go to the leaders. And he runs to Judah. He's in a cave talking and trying to get these leaders to listen to him. What do you think the leaders of Judah did? The Philistines went up and camped in Judah. The people of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" They said, "We've come to take Samson prisoner, to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah, 3,000 went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, "We come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." This isn't what godly leadership looks like. But how often those that are hurting come to us, we turn them away.